So Janice, share with us the good news.
Yes, well, thank you, and bear with me. I just hit the record button as well, so there we go. No more sports talk, I suppose. All right. Well, thank you. So just a reminder that our conversations on this student-based public school plan that we're working on, that conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in the new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant of the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will be ultimately included in the proposed new funding formula. Thank you for bearing with me to read the proclamation as we move on into our discussions. I'll kick it back to you, Dr. Boyd. And let's see.
Sorry, I'm on mute. So thank you, Janice. And I think I don't know that we need to do we need to do a roll call?
No, I can keep up with that and make sure we got it documented. I want to welcome George Mullenhauer. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hi, Nicole. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Well, Janice, let's jump right in. You've got two different documents for us to review, and you and I talked previously about a few words that might be a little challenging that we might want to spend a lot of our time or some of our time to discuss. But I'll let you take us through the documents.
Yeah. So I'll point us on over, as you said earlier, our got a couple more coming in. Yeah, our topic for meeting 5 is refining our feedback and then also looking over the new draft. So I hope everyone can see. I'll toggle and layer a few things on, but we will review you've been reviewing comment. We'll look at the draft, and then it'll set us up for our meeting 6, where we have some final policy considerations and again, iterating on any final recommendations. So this is just a good place for us to reflect. I'll hold the draft. I'll try to make that a little bigger. You have several of these, all of these items in your Google folder. But yeah, so we'll just kind of toggle through and get any, have you had a chance to review the draft funding formula? Hi, Tracy, welcome. And I'll just pause here to let us maybe talk through what was surfaced on our framed out. Of course, this does not have a dollar figure, no costs are assigned. This is just pulling into those categories for, as it has the base here, the visual rather, your base formula for all students, weighted values that could serve as a multiplier for students, and then our teachers direct funding for those programs that are specific fixed costs that we want to incentivize or be directly funded, and then outcomes. So I'll give just a minute and some space. We want to talk about the base, and I'll have our prior recommendations ready to pull up and compare as well, if that's helpful.
I guess, has everyone had a chance to review, and is there anything that you've noticed that are not reflective of what we've been discussing? Things you want to add, edit?
Yep, I will scroll down just a little for you. The weights continue into unique learning needs. charters or public charters.
I have a question, Janet. Janice, the different. I noticed that the weight comparability variance from heavy to bottom is that variant just telling people that we feel like this is the most important, the next most important? Is that what that means?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Okay.
Each of the subcommittees, as they were prioritizing, they also categorized it in to those categories of, let's see, like this one, like a must-have or a long shot. So it was a lighter or a moderate or heavy.
Is there a component based upon cost of living at all?
I think that, so that would be.
That was the intent of the rural and poverty concentrated areas?
It could be. I think that kind of also bears out in the local side when you're thinking about the local. I know maintenance of effort, would not be a change. Whatever is required would continue that at that basic level. But I feel like that cost of ability to pay would factor in from the local side. So this would just be the state contribution, the state side. Hey, we got Anita coming on.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Anita. You missed us reading our statement, and we're now diving in to reviewing
Thank
the
you.
documents. So you're welcome to join in at any spot.
Yeah, so we were just looking over the draft, the draft framework, the base, the weights, thinking about poverty, concentrated poverty. That's where we get into a conversation around rurality and sparsity, and thinking through some of those definitions, the weighted values. We had a conversation earlier about a district may not actually be rural, considered rural. Campbell County is a great example because of their proximity to Knoxville. They are not actually deemed rural. We would think otherwise if you're familiar. And but then also the sparsity, just the cost and transportation, time on a bus, things like that. So that's what those weighted values would address. And unique learning needs. Several of the groups have really focused on some of these subgroups. You see students with disabilities, gifted, English learners, 504 dyslexia plans. So I think it's interesting also, a requirement for a student-based funding is that you would all be able to tag that to an accounting or a tracking, a way to know. So these are all verifiable at the school level in the way they would capture attendance. So always with each of these categories, connecting that to a verifiable audited funding source. Then we mentioned direct funding. You'll see some of the things you've recommended noted here as well. So direct funding for fast growing, tutoring, and then college and career. So preparing for programs and high demand value, CTE is also included in the base, but having funding that would be specific for programs and student participation across the state in those particular high demand, high value programs. And then outcomes, thinking about the additional weight with an incentivized area. And I think we really spent some time thinking about outcomes for, say, completers. So students that might have those reports for counseling in the middle grades. I know this group has mentioned that. Then how might that bear out with our state seeing more students set up for success for a completion of a program? Even in completing for industry certification or a credit, or you all had a lot of recommendations there. And I will pull that up so it's ready for you to see as well. kind of layering over. That's not perfect, but also in the outcome section, so CTE completers, so incentivizing for us to have more students completing programs that lead to industry certifications or a career path, college, whatever your choice might be. And I like the way this committee put that last year, just that last week. Not necessarily, I think Andy pulled off college. He said just career. It may take college to move toward the career of your choice, but it's just career support. And then apprenticeships that was mentioned in this group, and then also FAFSA completion, I think was mentioned here as well. So that's an overview. Happy to keep that up here for us to toggle, but I will layer over some of the recommendations that you all had last time we met. So I sent this as an updated version. I sent with some feedback from the group, which was helpful. Thank you. So just any, I guess anything that you see you would want to add, anything that's missing, any iterations on, this was what you prioritized in the base. And teacher salary as a priority, pre-K, college and career counselors, social and emotional counseling, and teasing out the differences in those roles, transportation. And this actual notation, I think I saw this showing up in comments here, also in the draft, additional considerations, career coaches, and that feedback there.
I'll just speak up, Dennis, and say, for me, it seemed very reflective of everything that we discussed and agreed upon. I don't really have any changes or edits.
All right. I'll scroll through. I don't know if you had
anyone else?
Mhm.
We do get one last try next week, but for now, that is right, Janice, right? If we somehow discover something that we missed, we have another try next week, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. So weighted values, we didn't actually pull anything extra out here, and we had outcomes. Yep. They're just thinking through how many students finished as consecutive completers. All right, well, I will minimize that, and then we can certainly reference it as needed. And I'll pull over policy. So these were the next in our, next was policy discussions. So thinking about what is listed here, and then also what your recommendations form, I can add that, just teasing out any of the differences. And scroll. So we had a few just definitions, and coming out of the subcommittees across, and then also the steering committee, just a few things that we want feedback on. So I will just kind of hand it over to us to dive in and ask questions or just weigh in. So some of the jargon, there's some education jargon here. I need someone to be a norm keeper and say, hey, I see educational jargon. So direct certification, does everybody know what that is? Okay. So that direct certification, that's actually a legislative change for us a few years ago to begin, so students would be eligible for that, like normally free and reduced. So it's students who may be in a migrant, or their families receive SNAP or TANF dollars, homeless. So those students would automatically fall in that category to receive funding. Something that came out of some of the other committees was a definition of like a working poor. So in the past, we had free and reduced. So I think their legislative approach was to help alleviate some of the burdens for paperwork. I think as students are matriculate toward the high school, they actually don't fill that paperwork out. At lower grades, we get that. But just, I think that was an approach to ease that burden. But it's also then how if you, a way to provide additional funding for concentration of poverty could be if they attend a Title I school. So if 200 students are in that school and it's categorized as a Title I school, then all 200 students would receive at that school would receive that additional weighted value. I'll let you toggle through. Are there any of these that stand out? I know we talked a little bit about sparsity and rurality. Rural is not necessarily on this, but could be something to talk about, like a definition. All right. I'm not hearing any extra questions, or are you just processing?
Janice, I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, but please review the CTE content and provide feedback on how Tennessee may choose to address CTE considerations.
Yep.
What is that referring to?
Okay, and certainly you've got time to still do that for the next meeting. It was really weighing in on for the draft for any CTE areas that were noted here in the direct funding. I think there are a few marked here: ACT, complete four-year post-secondary. There were also in our Google folder. Let's toggle here. I think we had a few documents. We got lots of things layered. I hope you can see. So in our folder, meeting 5. So there are a couple of documents around CTE. So some funding recommendations. These might be interesting to pin and review, and just to get your take on any feedback there. There's a CTE overview for Tennessee. So just a scanning of that.
Okay, well, I've read all of that, and the thing that I didn't see incorporated anywhere, but we have talked about a lot, is the need to do fundamental career orientation, workforce environment, and career exploration in grades 5 through 7, so that when these children get to 8th and 9th grade, they've been exposed to different careers. They've had a chance to learn about what a work life is, and as they go into the CCTE process at the high school level, they aren't starting at that point in time learning, what a work environment is or what the options are. And that's, we're losing so many of these kids before they even get to high school age. And if this is in here somewhere, I am sorry, I have missed it.
No, I think that's a great feedback. It's similar to what I think we were speaking to earlier. We're trying to get to that around career coaches for 7th or 9th grade. Is that getting to that topic?
Well, that's part of it. Obviously, you have to have someone who is there who can do this. But I mean, to me, this ought to be, a commitment for a program at that level across the board in the form of classes, not just a counselor. Because so many of these children, at least in West Tennessee, don't even have a chance to know where to start. And, a counselor can't deal with every single student.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we need to have some kind of, I know this is hard because we need the CCTE dollars at the upper levels to get to certification. But right now, we're not getting this done young enough for that to be possible. And I just think we need to, incorporate something in this from a policy point of view to encourage that kind of classwork. Because absent that, I just don't think we're going to move the needle on CCTE in West Tennessee. I mean, we can't wait till they're 10th graders.
Gotcha. Yep.
I don't know if this is being too granular, Janice, but maybe the career orientation and programs could be built into the standard classes. So maybe there's a math class that you have to actually explore in the application of understanding math. So it's not a completely deep program, but it's embedded into the other programs potentially. I know that adding another course is always challenging, but if it could be, the courses could be modified to highlight career choices and life skills, maybe a way to address that.
I think we had another suggestion also of maybe funding some virtual reality type exploration devices. So that could pretty much be used in any classroom.
Yeah, tell me more about that, Dr. Ricker. The virtual.
Basically, virtual reality headsets allow career exploration. So you can have a manufacturing track, an automotive track, construction track, hospitality, healthcare, and those are just the ones we have on our devices. But the kids love them, and it's a good way that those that get done early with a homework assignment can work on something, or it's a good activity for outside because you're still outside moving. All you need is internet access. So it's pretty flexible and can be used in a variety of ways.
Nice. Okay. I've got
Yeah,
that.
and the other thing that does is it allows children from rural locations, which may have a transportation or access problem to some of these kinds of programs, to have a way to experience it. Nursing may be very hard for rural children to have an opportunity to actually explore what a nursing career would look like. I mean, there are 100 applications for this. I love this virtual reality. In Memphis, we could do this and it would help us so much.
I can add to what's being said. In my experience, students, even if you expose students, if they are not academically prepared for those careers, how do you marry that exposure and that academic preparation? So in previous colleges, we've had those experiential learning, and students want to be a nurse. They all want to be a nurse if they're going into allied health, but they're not prepared from mathematics or reading. And so there has to be that preparation and an emphasis on being prepared for careers, so they can go on a field trip and find out about a career. But when you're talking about computer technology, if they've not been prepared with the basic academic preparation to even be ready, then you're just dangling something in front of their faces that's still maybe not realistic for them, because they've not been prepared, not because they couldn't do it, but they've just not had that preparation.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. That's why we need to be starting this in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, so that academic preparation that's necessary in high school, so that they come to a post-high school world already prepared, is meaningful to them. And that's where right now, by the time they figure it out, like you said, they land in your institution and they don't have the fundamentals to begin to do the work. So we've got to we've got to do the whole track.
Absolutely. I would even go even further back. I know we've seen and document about universal pre-K and pre-K through 3rd. I'm just a big proponent of early childhood education and getting the kids a really good head start to their education, because a lot of kids, by the time they've reached even 5th and 6th grade, maybe it sounds bad to say too late, but depending on what they've experienced, they may have already disengaged from education. So if their focus on literacy is critical, and being able to read and comprehend, that opens up so much of a world for them if they can read and comprehend, and to see what the possibilities are. And so it's all tied together.
Nice. I got it.
I did want to ask, and if it's in there, my apologies as well. I'm just processing. Is there anything in terms of funding and for family support? And I don't know if this is appropriate for this funding as well, but you know, we talk a lot about what we can do once kids get to our classrooms and our institutions, but you think about the amount of time that they spend with us versus at home, and who's more impactful. Their experiences at home, and so a lot of times the home life needs some help.
Mm-hmm.
There needs some support there for families that are struggling, maybe having good intentions, but they're just struggling, and that's impacting the kids. If you don't have lights on in your house, you can't study. You don't have mom and dad. If you don't have transportation, you can't get to the library. And so we can't disconnect that experience from how it impacts students. So I think we do a lot. We work really hard at our institutions to help support kids, but they go home to environments that aren't conducive to learning sometimes. And so how do we support that whole network that helps them to be successful? So when they come to school, they have what they need. They are supported.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the funding is all, if that's been discussed already, but just thought I'd throw that out.
Always appreciated. Yep. And I can add that as well. Thinking about how or where that would show up, I wonder if it's would be part of the base or connected with some of the support resources that would be district specific, but then coordinated school health. I know that some of that is for sure connecting to poverty and needs. I know coordinated school health programs provide you know, food sources for when students are not in school. A lot of good work there. So I've pinned that as well about what family supports, kind of like wraparound services. Okay. Yeah, good. I've added that and I can paste it over. Go ahead.
If I could just ask a question, and I'm not, my background is not in education, so this may be a terrible suggestion, but kind of along the same lines, if we think about the required courses for a child who is already struggling with resource and access, would it make sense to look at some of the courses that may currently be requirements that may not be as valuable to that child in their career path? For example, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I hope I don't offend anybody in asking this question. Something like a second language, you know, to the extent that a second language is a requirement for children to graduate from a given school or program, would it make sense to allow for exceptions for them to spend that time and that energy, and in particular that time at school, where I believe to Ms. Hall's point, if they're at school, but there's no time available in the day for them to take the types of courses that we're talking about now, the career development courses, and we're having to rely on after school programs to meet that need. But to Ms. Hall's point, maybe they don't have transportation, or maybe they don't have the resource to be able to participate in that. Would we be better served, would those children in particular be better served if there could be slots opened up during the day when they're already on the campus? And is it necessary that we perhaps remove some courses, or at least make those more optional as opposed to required to achieve that goal? I'll stop there and let those who are more familiar with the school day speak to it.
I think that's a good thought. And certainly, I've just kind of tagged it under flexibility. So to think through and captured your comment there to how we might modify or just have the flexibility to ensure students' critical needs are being met, and what flexibility exists there. So I think that's helpful.
I think there's a bucket of different other ideas that don't necessarily tie to the BEP funding formula. So I think when you look at I think the comment about supporting families, we absolutely need to do that. I'm not sure that formula funding is the right way to do it, but it's at least our opportunity to have our voices heard, and they can once they recognize the problem, they find which funding mechanism to do more of that. But it's definitely worth noting. Same thing with the curriculum. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of that having this conversation really just kind of provides the opportunity for other areas to pop in. And so that's really good to capture your feedback and your thoughts. So definitely weigh in. So thinking about just other things that are listed here for you all to consider. And they're just posed as questions. So it surfaced either coming out of a committee or in some places it's just a question also from the steering committee. So knowing our process that we're taking all of the feedback from each of the subcommittees and those are then moving to the steering committee and would be recommended then in a formula for General Assembly to weigh in. But so really trying to get both granular and then big bucket. So it's fine to do both. Teacher salaries, I think that's been one, and almost all the committees I'm on is surfaced, and it was listed as the top here. So I think that's pretty consistent. A question was, are there other policies for teacher salaries that should be included? Not sure, something to think about there. And then also, I'll just kind of slide on through and you all ping pong as needed. Tutoring. So tutoring, this is actually referencing a requirement that is legislatively in play that would start for us beginning a year from this spring. And so we're playing with that now. We currently have grant dollars to help us problem solve. We have early adopters who are working on this approach to accelerate learning. So it's tutoring. It could be after school, it could be during school, but it's really maximizing the opportunity to have a standards approach. So that was a question, kind of front loading the standard to help a student. I think a term would be just-in-time instruction. So it's I see both during the day, and then we know it's hard to get students, and there's transportation needs and such, and just tired after school. So trying to maximize while we have students. So I see a lot of the push-in type model where they're working to accelerate students. This would be this would go into effect for third grade students, so rising fourth graders who are currently below or approaching proficiency or on track. So that's not currently funded. So that's the reason it's pinned here is that something that we would want to tie dollars to. It's mentioned also in the weights or the direct fund, direct funding. And the way we would be able to then track that, students would have individualized learning plans and the data submissions because we're checking progress to ensure that data and that the tutoring is effective. So it's high dosage, as in high dosage for 2 or 3 times a week in a particular content for an entire semester, and a low ratio. So it's a small group, 1 to 3 ratio.
Hey, Janice, Lee Barfield, I have a question.
Yeah, hey.
About the tutoring thing. I mean, logically, you would think that any child during a year, regardless of what grade they're in, if they are testing below grade level, they should be in the need of tutoring, it would seem to me. And it looks like what's being discussed is starting at third grade, TCAP, et cetera, et cetera. Is that important or not? It would seem to me as a kind of an outsider looking in that we ought to be having tutoring availability for all the kids that are below grade availability. Now, I know that's a huge number of them now, but everybody should be on grade level, shouldn't they?
We hope so. We certainly work toward that growth, and we know students kind of come in at different places, and there are always gaps. We have some that feel exacerbated from pandemic things that are extensive, but gaps have always existed. So I think that might be one of the things that kind of bears out of this type situation with our pandemic, that this approach is real strategic. So I like what you're saying. To your point, what's not written here is that the strategy that we're putting in place, and it references it over on the draft, is saying the high dosage, low ratio tutoring via Tennessee All Core. So that's the strategy that we have across the state for grades 1 through 5 to help really, to your point, tutor on the standard. So it's not necessarily remediation, it's acceleration. So it just takes that little bit of information that the student might have missed or needed to be able to access the current teaching, what the teacher is about to teach, so that you set them up for success. So it's a research approach, and yeah, so the tag here is connecting for the policy, is connecting to a legislative. We had that came out of last year's session. So it's a new legislation regarding students that are rising fourth graders.
I'm not K through 12, but a question: does that intervention help them to move into being ready in the fourth grade?
Yes, that's absolutely. So that's absolutely. So the data we have, we are tracking data, or will be. This is kind of new still, but yeah, that's the goal. That's the hope, the goal, and the work is to ensure that students then are ready, and that it's just in time. So it's kind of that rapid. It's different from maybe a remediation approach. It's acceleration so that you're able to, the student can find success right away. So it sets them up for success, kind of to your point, for that wraparound preparedness specific to the content that they're about to be engaged in, or they just had. So, yeah.
This is really relative to the formula, but one of the things we're going to be doing in Knox County is beginning testing at kindergarten level. And so, because if you wait and test it in third grade and then try to catch up, you've got 4 years to catch up. It's going to be, I think the tutoring is great. It's better than nothing, but it's going to be really hard to catch up of everything they've not done the 4 previous years. So we got to start intervening, learning that we're behind earlier and intervening earlier.
Yeah, and that was my point. That was really what I was getting at with the question about, does it help? Because it feels like they're being accelerated, but what's done earlier so that they won't do poorly on that, was that TCAP in the third grade?
Mm-hmm.
More of a preventative measure as opposed to intervention. It seems like in education, we always seem to be at that stage where we're catching them as they've already fallen, trying to stand them up, as opposed to preventing them from falling in the first place.
Yeah,
and I was going to say something similar. I agree with that notion, that plan. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you all. So thinking about these other items here, these next 3 really were coming out of the steering committee, and they kind of delineated into the areas. So the early grades, a K2 weight, or middle grades, and then just in general elementary. So the steering committee is asking for thoughts and feedback on outcomes, or a weighted value for K2. How might we consider a K2 weight or additional investment in those early years? That shows here as well on the draft. The proposed funding framework would include direct funding for each of those categories, and getting at that all core here. But what else might, I heard mentioned pre-K. So anything else in that K2 space that feels like it would really help support our weighted value to help support those early investments in early grades? place the pre-K comment there to kind of help support for that K2 space. I think that's critical. Anything stand out? I've heard middle school, so I can kind of pull over from what you were saying around some of the supports in middle school. So the virtual reality supports, career exploration, programming that's embedded in courses to expose students to career opportunities. I've got that listed. Experiential learning paired with academic preparedness. So I can put those comments that you all pulled out earlier. I can pair that here for maybe some outcomes to start thinking there. I'll add that. All right, so anything else for elementary? The tutoring seems to be but acceleration, how else would you say that? Getting at what you all were commenting for elementary. Tutoring for sure, but was there anything that I heard mentioned, maybe getting in front of that in some way? Was there anything else that you might could?
I think it's just generally the policy is heavily weighted investment in pre-K and K through 2, K through 3, where there's an emphasis on tutoring and early assessment.
Gotcha.
And intervention.
Nice. All right, and then a few more that were pulled forward. Some of the accountability, thinking about the steering committee question was measures that should be included in any new formula proposal around accountability. There's reporting.
Janice, on this Lee Barfield, on the accountability issue, what's the plan if a school is not doing well and their students are not performing well? What sort of accountability measures are you talking about here? What might the steering committee be thinking of? What's appropriately within their jurisdiction?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that is routing over closer to these outcomes. So thinking about incentivizing, we already have accountability in place from federal. So those are assessment and accountability systems and structures. They feel robust, and that's from the federal side that holds schools and accountable in districts. But then thinking about incentivizing for outcomes. We've listed several ready graduate indicators. That's also weighs into accountability. I guess it's just an ask for anything else that feels like it would be helpful. I know they're wanting more. They're wanting some feedback or brainstorming around elementary for accountability measures, but not. I guess it sounds like it's punitive, and we're wanting to think about it in a different way. Think about what would be incentivizing. So I most clearly think about it for ready graduates. Like if we, as a state, if we're trying to increase the number of students who are completers, then some of the things you've mentioned here sets that up for success. And then we could provide additional funds for students who, if we have, only 100 students in my district who completed a program, and I'm trying to hit more students would be 200. So having an increase for students who actually completed that progression of a program that leads to a certification that sets them up for either that college or career next step. So here are several listed. And specifically with elementary, we have several questions that are looking for ideas of how to approach that.
Yeah, I don't understand why they don't have an incentive based on the percentage of students, performing at grade level for every year of elementary school. And I'm kind of with, I don't know who else said that, but I mean, if we're waiting till whether their ACT is 21 or higher, we're way too late. I mean, my experience with the educational process here in Shelby County is you get more of what you pay for. So, you know, if we would say, look, you will get additional support if you, for every student you have at grade level, you would find that they would move in that direction. So that's kind of where I would go with that. I mean, just keep it simple.
That might address the issue of students who they pass in the first grade or the second grade that they probably should not. So maybe if they really are not at grade level, they will hold them back, which I understand the social stigmatism of that, but at the same time, they're just passing along a problem, which then they're not adequately prepared for the next grade level, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think if you also provide support for the high dosage tutoring in the lower grades, but you're also giving them a way to get that done, you can make this an incentive process rather than, I am with you, I don't want to make it just punitive, because being punitive hasn't worked so well. I mean, they don't do well and nothing happens to them. And this question on the funding year, I mean, my attitude is on this is that there's no reason for their money to be based on their enrollment a year ago. I mean, everybody knows who's enrolled. I mean, even in Shelby County, they get their last 2,000 kids in by the 1st of October. And the funding should be based on this year's enrollment. And for Davidson County, where it's growing real fast, they should get the benefit of a growing budget. But right now, Shelby County is working on the assumption they're not going to have to, they're going to have all the same funding, even though they've got, depending upon who you talk to, somewhere between 20 and 25,000 fewer kids in the whole district than they had pre-pandemic. So that's one reason why this is a good plan, because you're tying the funding to the number of students instead of sort of the, how much has it cost you to educate kids in the past?
So the idea is getting to that real time, as close to real time as possible. But then
real time, it's not that hard. I mean, come on. It's, you know, businesses adjust in a matter of days when the budget isn't going the way they need it to do. This one can be done quickly.
To be more nimble.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I agree with per pupil funding, but should there be some minimum that's given to rural schools so that rural or less populated schools at least can count on a certain amount of funding? I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I just toss it out.
Yeah, I like it. So I've captured that, the minimum. So what I hear you saying is that the base salary, and then I think we're trying to get to that idea of a more nimble approach, Chris, and it's responsive to the students who are there. So that would be how you could actually back up and tag we would know how to draw down those funds for the students that are there. If you have the poverty students, or if you have a high number of students with disabilities, or the 504 for dyslexic, that we have that way to that it's identifiable, it's auditable, all of that. And that's how you would identify to get those funds. Currently, we do have the lag, so it's based on a prior year. And that's hard whenever you're thinking about hiring teachers and knowing the numbers and shifts and changes. Sometimes you would plan for and hire, and then it would change. And so, you would keep the position. So that's good feedback as well. I have captured that.
Hey, Janice, with respect to the question about accountability, and this may already be a tool that you have in place, but to the extent that outcomes are being incentivized, specifically, test scores and so forth, it would naturally tempt a potential bad actor to fudge the numbers or assist the students in a way that would be inappropriate because they're being incentivized to do so at a state level and maybe even at a local level. Is there a mechanism in place from a data analytics standpoint at the department to essentially evaluate the test scores that are coming in for individual students over the course of time to almost red flag the instances where there may not be authentic test scores being provided to Nashville?
Yeah, so that would be a good point. So if it's on accountability data, so what I hear you saying is thinking about how we would gather that. So I think that's still open for that decision. Like, not sure how we might gather that data. If it's we have TCAP for sure and TVOS. Those are mechanisms that are vetted and analyzed and all of that in multiple ways. But if it's another informal metric, but yeah, what I hear you saying is that it's a way to checks and balances to check that out. Ensure quality. It's ensuring quality data.
I have a question.
Yeah, am I understanding that right? That's the gist of it.
Yeah, it's not so much the capture of the data as much as it is the analytics of it once you've obtained it. And essentially, if you're receiving hundreds of thousands of data points a year of test scores, is there a way to methodically at scale, and I know there is because it's used in the private sector all the time, is there a way to at scale, methodically, and even down to the individual student, have a statistical analysis applied that would red flag the instances where, again, you might have a localized bad actor or someone who is trying to fudge the numbers, because that's not regardless of, aside from the money, it's not serving the students well if test scores are not reflecting their actual performance, because we were talking a few minutes ago about identifying students that need additional tutoring and so forth. Well, if their individual test scores are being manipulated in some form, even without their knowledge, then we're not identifying when that student needs help. I'm using that as an example of one potential bad outcome of that scenario. So I know that there's software and there's tools that can be used in this type of application. Again, it's not as much a question of how do we obtain pure or accurate data as much as once we've obtained that data, how do we, again, at scale across hundreds of thousands of students, how do we analyze that so that a red flag or a yellow flag can be thrown to suggest that someone take a closer look at a given school or a given teacher within a school or a given classroom that is unusual in the behavior of the outcomes, based on prior history and so forth.
Great, thank you for that explanation. Yep.
I had a quick maybe comment question about the accountability. I'm all for grade level accountability. My concern is for it seems like, and maybe I don't know how widespread this is, but kids just go from school to school. And how do you hold a school accountable for a kid being on grade level if that child has been moved from school to school and the education hasn't even been consistent? I see parents will move their kids because they didn't play a sport at this school, didn't make the team, so they're going to another school. And that just boggles my mind how that's even a priority. But it happens. And so how do you then, that student is then a part of that other school and they're being held responsible for something that wasn't done before they got there? Again, maybe that's factored into this whole process, but that would just be a concern about penalizing, I guess, a school for not having every child on grade level when you have kids that have gone to multiple schools before they even got there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I kind of tag in both of those last comments together with our data accountability rules. So we do have time for instruction, and then as it takes into consideration students that are moving. So then it kind of is a hold harmless in that respect for instructional time. So it's in our accountability rules, but those are certainly things that we would want to keep front of mind as we move to a different funding structure that is more student-based and specific. So we keep those and analyze those accounting reporting structures to ensure for that quality on all rounds. Yeah, that's a good comment too. So I think some of these others, the ADM shifts. So that's, again, getting back to the fluctuation and being able to be nimble or hold harmless if it's necessary in times where we know, like right now, we know enrollment is off in some places. So we've had some hold harmless time. So for this current year, we operated off of 2018-19 data or enrollment. We're moving back toward what this year ended. So next year's will be based off this year. But as we think about that, just getting feedback on the approach and how to do that. I know a lot of those who are in the field or at the school level, they have spoken to that, like which months are given priority or consideration for that active enrollment. Maintenance of effort, of course, is getting toward that local side. We mentioned that just a bit. Was there anything else there to resurface? I think someone mentioned earlier the ability to pay, and that's more of that local side. Any thoughts on that?
Hey, Janice, just a real quick thought on the ADM shifts. One way that it could be addressed would be to create some sort of deviation threshold. In other words, if it doesn't change by more than 2, 3, or 4, or 5%, perhaps it's static for that year, or something, some upper limit or lower limit, or both, that just allows the local districts to rely on a more stable budget, so it's not whipsawing up and down as frequently.
That's great. Yep.
Hey, Janice and team, unfortunately, I have 7 o'clock here Eastern time. I've got to sign off. But carry on. It looks like we got near the end. And Janice, just share with us the notes, and hope everybody has a continued good conversation. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. I'll take us to this last slide. I'll wrap us up, honor your time. So same place that we have one more meeting, and it's next Monday, the 24th, same time, same place. And I will surface these recommendations and I will send them to this whole group, and you please weigh in and say, oh, you didn't capture that right. I can go back and listen. That's why we record, but feel free to weigh in with your thoughts. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Janice, thank you.
Thanks.
Great job.
Well,
Thank you. This is a really terrific product. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.